opening
Okay,
statement.
hello everybody. This is our guest today, Mr. Omuro. How are you?
Hello.
Oh, and
Uh, Pretty good.
okay, good. Okay,
Pretty good, yeah.
pretty good. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna make an opening statement about today's topic, which is syllables or the importance of syllables in learning English.
Hmm.
英語の approach really involves two things, which is one of the two is to resonate deeply in the throat to produce authentic native-like, should I say, accent or pronunciation. The
Right.
other one is we teach a lot of syllables and how it is important to keep the correct number of syllables.
Hmm.
For example, McDonald is like McDonald, but you have
Yeah.
to say like McDonald's to be able to communicate, you know,
Hmm.
in English and to be
Yep.
understood universally. And okay, that's the opening statement of our conversation, I guess. And yeah,
Hmm.
I have been always emphasizing this issue of syllable, not just
Yes.
to communicate, but to be able to listen and understand. Yeah,
Well,
if you can kind of.
I've written a couple of articles on syllables as well. Um, and to give you a little bit of background, I learned English. I mean, naturally. I went to school in California. Growing up, I went to school from when I was 5 years old. Um, and I was raised in America until I was 20 something before I left the US. So um, I can tell you what it was like when I learned English in school. And and in English, it's very important to understand that every vowel is important. Is my video coming through it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, so now you gave an example with McDonald's. The example I like to give is good morning. Um, Good morning. When you say good morning in English, it's three syllables. You have the good, you have more, and then you have ning. Right? When you try to say that, uh, when a Japanese person tries to say it, they will say like good morning, and the they're putting too many syllables in there, and it's not understandable to a person who's trying to listen to you, unless of course they're Japanese. But
Good
right,
morning.
right. Um, I think what happens is that you try to understand it in terms of your own language, and that's what you've got to let go of. Um, so, what's the better way to do this?
I want to tell you why it is difficult for many Japanese people to say good morning,
Mhm.
even when they are told, okay, say good morning, and they go, and they may say good morning instead of saying D, good morning, as opposed to good
Right,
morning.
right, 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 right.
The reason
Well,
is
it's a start. I mean,
the start.
it's it's better to say that. It's better, I think, if someone says good morning,
That's
it's
absolutely
it's
better.
right. I
Yeah,
mean, they have a chance of being understood.
right.
Um,
Actually, a lot of Vietnamese people, I think, living in America talk like that a little bit, I think. Maybe.
well, I mean, I think you and I both know the answer to this, and that's that Japanese doesn't have the concept of placing a consonant at the end of a syllable.
But another thing is, even when they are told to do so, they are unable to do so. So
Because,
that's the where Eigo no approach comes in. And
well,
actually,
I think they don't know how. Is that what it is?
yeah, if you say it like all the sounds deep in the throat, that's when sounds are able to be embedded in one syllable. Good, good. But if you say it in the mouth, good, good, so that's the issue. So that's
I
how
see.
they have to really relax, and they should be able to, push it
Mhm.
down so that you can pronounce every sound of it in the throat. So it becomes a cluster of sounds. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, and I always use children as a good example. Like if you say it a little bit in the mouth, it becomes three. Children, but if you push it down, children, children. So that's the mechanism of how sounds can be like, connected.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So that's why even though we are aware of even if somebody tells them and teaches them, okay, syllables are important, just use it, use syllables correctly, but still, Japanese people will have difficulty, which is why we have to speak from the throat to solve this problem once for all.
Okay. So you need both elements, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. You need to speak from the throat, and you need to keep syllables in mind.
And what's kind of interesting is that if you speak from the throat, somehow syllables will come out naturally, which is weird, but it's true. So it's like you have to do this and you have to do this, but it's like if you do one, for some reason both things will happen. This なぜかわかり喉から喋るとなぜかこんな感じになっちゃって、シラブルも正しくなりますね。Well, okay, so I'm kind of pushing towards 英語のway
Right.
again.
I get you. I get you.
Yeah. Which is my bad habit of, pushing everything towards this way. But I because of your experience of having lived in America as you grew up, how did you learn syllables in English classrooms?
Well, I do remember there were actually two. The way I learned when I went to several different schools because my parents like to move a lot. But one of the schools I went to, I remember doing a lot of clapping in class. And I remember when I was in first grade, there was a boy who sat next to me on the school bus, and he had a piece of paper that had words on it, spelling words he was learning, and he would speak them and he would clap to them. And when I was in first grade, I didn't know what he was doing, but I asked him, "What is it? Why are you clapping?" And he was pointing the words out to me, and he was like, apple, and he was like apple, and he was explaining to me that when you say these, there's two beats, so you have to clap twice. And that's the first time I understood. That's when I actually thought about syllables. I might have learned the word syllable at that time, but he said that the certain words have more than one, and you actually have to care. I didn't. I was a first grader, so I don't know how much I really had thought about it, but I think for the most part, most commonly used words don't have a lot of syllables. So,
Yeah, that's true.
Right?
Yeah, which is why maybe it's not immediately apparent for native speakers of English because so many words that we use
what's hard for probably for Japanese people is that the weight of a syllable. I mean, when I say weight, I mean the importance of a syllable is much heavier in English than in Japanese. When you speak Japanese, there are many words. I mean, almost every single word has more than one syllable. There's very few words that have one syllable, right?
Eat, stomach. Ka, mosquito.
Right.
Me.
Well, right.
Ha,
right.
it's easy to exhaust all the words that are possible.
And then the only way you can really tell the difference is, I guess, like ka or ha, right? But that's because there's only 50 sounds.
Right.
Right? There's only 50 sounds. And the 50 sounds are very simple because there's, 9, 10 consonants, and then there's 5 vowels. So it's just a simple table consisting of those, and that gives you 50. Because you can't even end a consonant. You can't even end a syllable with a consonant.
Yeah. Except for some, like cases such as N, maybe.
Correct. Yeah.
100 yen.
Like if you're
A little bit.
penguin or something,
Yeah.
that's probably just two.
Right.
Right. So I'm sure actually if you say penguin, then
Penguin. Yeah.
you're sort of likely to be understood because that's similar to the English
Right.
because it's only two syllables. I'm right. If you say pen, that's that's one syllable, so it's easy to understand. But even if you're saying um, anything even slightly more complicated, I mean, there's diphthongs, for example, which are two vowels stuck together. Like if you say I, yeah, that's two vowels, but that's two vowels stuck together,
Yeah.
and you say it as one syllable in English.
In Japanese too, actually, I think most of the time, like taiko.
Right. So
Taiko.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
You'll be understood if you say I, and
Yeah.
you'll also, if it's a diphthong, you'll be understood. But other than that, like the good morning example, right? If you say good morning, then that's not recognizable as a word in English, right? So you have to understand that every syllable in English is important. Every syllable, right? If you leave a syllable out, you get a different word. If you say a syllable incorrectly, you probably have a different word.
I agree with you 100%. And even when pronunciation is kind of off, but as long as you keep the correct number of syllables, people will understand you. So in the beginning, when I wasn't yet used to this concept of syllables, and when I went to eat Vietnamese noodle, and then Vietnamese people were talking to me with very heavy, strong accent, my wife, who is American, was understanding them a lot better than me. But once I realized, okay, they are also using syllables, right? And then I began to understand. Like to me, when they said small or large, when they were asking me about the size of noodle I want, it sounded like small or large is what I heard. But I noticed, okay, small and large. It's the number of syllables is correct, when they speak. So that's how I am now able to understand them better.
Now, did it sound that way? Like, for example, you left off the G at the end right now when you explained it. Did it sound that way to you because you didn't know how to listen to it yet?
I think it did, yes. But now I feel like I can hear their G now.
Right.
But back then it sounded like small or large. But they're actually saying small and large, or large, I think, in their own way.
Right. Or they're trying to.
They're trying to. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very important you get the number of syllables right. It would be like leaving out a single letter. And I mean, when you speak Japanese, I guess it's like how every syllable is important in Japanese too. If you leave out a syllable, you have a different word, right? But it might be less of an impact because each word is made up of more than one syllable.
Yeah, you can kind of guess even when you miss one. Like, yeah, I think because in Japanese we give you so much information that you can't kind of probably understand even you miss one syllable perhaps. 例えばね、maybe. Well, I guess even in Japanese, you really have to keep the correct number of syllables.
You do.
Yeah. Chuas.
Well, I think that's understandable because, I mean, it's used a lot.
Right.
Metabo. Oh, yeah, right. Those are abbreviations.
Right.
Yeah, I think you have abbreviations in every language, though. If they're used enough, people will understand. Right.
Oh, no.
Like, if I say I need to take my meds, it's like saying I have to take my medication, but medication is long, so they just say med, and you understand because it's used a lot.
Vet, med, Yeah.
Vet,
like a pet doctor.
Vet. Yes.
Yeah. Uh, I think that you mentioned that syllables are very. I mean, it's a very important thing to really, it's very important. But I have encountered this conversation so many times when I mentioned that syllable is very important. They say, oh, but there's also something else that's very important. Like you have to understand culture, you have to understand this, and you have to understand that. But there should be a sense of priority, right? Syllable is important. The next is this, and next is that, kind of. So you have to really learn the basics, which is the syllable.
Mm, mm.
And so
I
I
see.
feel like intonation is kind of secondary. It is important, but if you don't have syllable, I mean
Intonation,
intonation,
intonation.
yeah,
That's true. Yeah, it's syllables are number one.
yeah,
Intonation is probably number two compared to that.
right,
Like if I say instead of saying intonation, I say intonation or intonation. Um, I mean, they might say what,
yeah,
but I mean, you're close.
close enough.
Also, it's important because like um, when you speak English, there's a concept of you emphasize things by emphasizing the syllable that's important. If I'm telling someone, please don't please don't overdo that. Well, then um, notice that I said overdo. Like I'm saying do, the do part of overdo. Very, I'm placing an accent on that. But like um, if someone says what, and then I say, well, if I repeat myself or if I emphasize the over part, like please don't overdo it, then I mean something a little bit different. You know, um, maybe that was not a very good example.
I think that's a good example. Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Like, I mean, if I say, uh, "Can you come over to my work?" Um, and then I say, "Well, hey, instead, let's come to my house." Right? Now, if I say, "Let's come to my house," I'm saying, "Let's go to my house,"
Right,
as opposed to my work. The house part is important, so I'm saying, "Let's go to my house." The house is being accented. But if I say, "Let's go to my house," then that's my house as opposed to your house, right? So it's if I put the accent on the house, then it's house as opposed to something else. If I put the
right.
accent on my, it's my as opposed to somebody else. So do you understand what I mean?
I
It's like
understand, and that's an interesting to get part of speech, and I feel those are a very important issue. When I participated in a speech contest, people who did really well, performed really well with their speeches, are people who are really good with kind of articulation and intonation, and they are able to use pitch in a very effective way to
mhm,
express. Yeah, so I see
right,
that. Yeah,
right. So English is not always possible to write down with all of those nuances. A lot of times, like for example, um, I mean, if I wanted to say that, like, let's go to my house, then when you write it down, like a newspaper might put my in italics. And that, italics, um, when the letters are
yeah.
slanted, right? Um, that's very important in English because you have to emphasize that part because that contains part of the meaning. Um, Probably not so much in Japanese. In Japanese, you probably do those kinds of things by using different particles. Like you would use wa instead of ga or mo, and that contains those meanings.
I always thought that standard Japanese relies on expressions explicitly to express. Like, it's easier to explain this from the English way. Imagine I say, make coffee versus, oh, make coffee. Like, just by the way I say it, the meaning of the two can be slightly different. But in
Hmm.
Japanese, you change the expression itself. コーヒー作ってくださる versus コーヒー作れ or something like that, right? So at the expression
Oh,
level,
right,
you can
right,
kind of
right.
change. Of course, I mean, I can't really say one is completely relying, I mean, dependent upon the the voice versus the exact expression. There's a mix of
Yes,
that, but
yes.
I
If you
think
have ever, if you have ever tried to take Japanese written dialogue and translate it into English, um, and written dialogue, excuse me, then you'll see it's very difficult to do and preserve the flavor. Um, because in Japanese you have, I mean, you have things like honorifics
right.
that don't translate very well into English, especially written English. Um,
This should mean that Japanese is more difficult than English.
mm, I don't know if you can say that. I think they're just the languages have different emphasis. Different things are important in each language. I mean, I suppose English is simpler because you don't have to worry about things like honorifics. You don't have to worry about, um, I
Yeah,
mean,
right.
like in Japanese, like the way you end your sentences might differ depending on whether you are at work or at home, whether you are a man or a woman, if you are a child or if you're an old person, or if you're from a different part of the country. Um, I
Yeah,
there's a lot, and you know, but if English is all just subject verb subject verb, everybody all sentences are always just subject verb. You don't leave things out, um, and all sentences end up structured very similarly, right? So in a sense, it's simple. But I, you know, Japanese is also elegant in its own way because you can leave words out that aren't important right then, um, like if it's hot, you don't have to say it's hot in Japanese. You don't have to say that the it's part. You just have to say atsui. And like obviously it's about me. Obviously I'm talking about the current environment, right? You don't have to say I'm hot. You don't like obviously it's I and obviously it's am, right? You can leave things out in Japanese, and
yeah.
that also has its own simplicity and elegance that English doesn't have. So I don't know that you could really say one's simpler than the other. I just think that they're emphasized in different ways. So when your mind is used to thinking about it in one way, um, it's probably very hard to approach it from a different angle.
Right. I agree with that.
Hmm.
Um, although I
Yeah,
feel
it's
like
interesting.
Japanese may be slightly more difficult, but um, that I'll probably I'm
I, you know, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but
yeah,
I think
but I
I
feel
think
like
I should be
yeah,
very I think I should be very grateful that I learned English the way I did because English has so many um, quirks, I'd like to say, so many exceptions and so many rules that don't make sense. Um, I think a lot of it you have to pick up naturally. One thing I'd like to say is that languages, not this applies to every language out there probably. Um, when you think, when you're thinking about
yeah,
something, um, and it's like, oh, I know, or you sometimes you speak out loud, yeah, or you think out loud. If you think out loud, you'll be either thinking in English or, for me, it depends on what I'm thinking about. I'd be thinking in Japanese. But I think people generally think in language, right? So the structure of the language determines um, how you think, I think. So what that also means is that languages generally, the way languages are structured, they map out the way people think in that language.
yeah.
So um, if I'm thinking in English, then what that means is that my thought structure is defined by and it's also limited by the language. And if I'm thinking in Japanese, the same thing happens there as
Yeah.
well. The way that people's minds wander has a lot to do with the way the language is structured.
I like it
So
when people say in America, "Oh, I'm thinking out loud."
Mm-hmm.
I hear that expression all the time. They are
Mm-hmm.
thinking, out loud,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, they are thinking in their own language
Correct.
a
They are.
lot. Yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah.
everybody does that. I don't know that you say that you're thinking out loud in Japanese, but I mean, you are, right? I mean, usually you can write out what you're thinking.
独り
You
言。
can, right,
Yeah,
right, right. You can. You can, I guess you can speak to yourself,
yeah.
right? But I think that's possible. And I think the way that you speak has a lot to do with
Yeah.
the way you think.
Now, I think we're going to conclude our conversation. So what we have said is the importance of syllables, and there may be some sense of priority for that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So
Right.
yeah.
So your um, claim, your um, your assertion is that when you speak from deep within your throat, then the concept of syllables comes naturally. I
Pretty
think that's what
much.
you're saying.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Um,
Although it's good to make conscious efforts to learn, oh, how many syllable is this? And microphone, okay. I mean, it helps,
mhm,
reinforces
mhm, mhm,
the idea.
mhm.
Yeah.
I wonder if you don't really think about that in Japanese because every word has so many, and you actually
Oh, hold on.
um,
My dog is in trouble.
your dog is in trouble.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wait. Okay. I'll talk to you later. I guess I gotta go now.
okay.
Yeah. All right. Bye.